Hello, my dear viewers. This amazing story will be very instructive for you. It is very interesting and beautiful. I wish you enjoy watching it.
Julia called a cab and hurriedly got into the car. She told the driver where to take her. As soon as the driver dropped her off at her destination, the 40-year-old woman paid and quickly left the car. In her thoughts was beating only one thought, that now all the pain in her soul will soon end and she will finally find peace. Julia quickly approached the coveted bridge, the sound of her heels resounding loudly in the silence. It was 4 in the morning and there were no people at all. The woman had chosen this particular bridge on purpose, as it was always a little crowded, and so she was sure that no one would interfere with her plans. Julia quickly crossed half of the bridge and stopped. She looked over the railing into the water and breathed a sigh of relief, because now everything would end here. The woman climbed over the railing and looked up at the sky as she suddenly heard a man's voice speaking softly. "A foolish decision. There are many other ways to end your life." The woman flinched at being addressed and turned her head toward the speaker. She saw a man about her age standing across the street by another railing. Julia wondered how this stranger was here, for she had not seen him when she came here. The woman said in reply, "Where did you come from? You weren't here. How could you notice me if you were so busy thinking about jumping into the river? And it's not hard to guess why you wanted to do it. I'll say it again. It's stupid to jump off a bridge. If you guessed, then now you decided to play Jack from the movie Titanic and save Rose by talking." Julia said irritably, "You called the movie cool, but I'm afraid that I do not have the eloquence of DiCaprio and cannot beautifully describe how cold the water at this time of year, still before the beach season, is still far away. But I can say something else, that you are thinking only about yourself now. Perhaps you have reasons for this act that you want to do, and probably you think that it will be easier for you. Now think about your loved ones. What will it be like for them? Surely you have relatives who could not recognize what you have in your soul, could not help you, and they will consider your departure from life as their fault because they were not able to lend a helping hand when you needed it. And your relatives will blame themselves for it for the rest of their lives," said the stranger in a calm voice. "Are you a psychologist?" said the woman, suddenly feeling tears come to her eyes. "No, I work as a lawyer. So what's next? Are we going to talk while you're standing behind the railing? Can I come over here and help you back up? See, I even ask permission and I don't rush in without your permission. And I can even tell you why. If I try to approach you now, you'll involuntarily do what you're up to and I won't have time to do anything about it. The choice is yours." Julia was confused by the situation and didn't know what to do. She hadn't expected to notice a man on the bridge who would turn to her. Meanwhile, the man stood watching the woman, waiting for her to make a decision and what kind of decision she would make. Julia clumsily began to climb over the railing, and the stranger, noticing it, hurried to help her. The woman looked at him gratefully and said nothing. As soon as Julia was on the other side of the railing, the interlocutor extended his hand and greeted her. "My name is Steve." And then the stranger suggested a conversation in a more appropriate setting. And Julia at the same moment became wary and said, "Or maybe you're a scoundrel and you have other purposes in mind to get acquainted. What are you doing here at this early hour? I see you're coming to your senses," the man said with a laugh and then continued seriously. "I'm not a rapist. I am here for one reason and I do it once a year and on this day. This is a strange conversation we're having. I feel awkward, but maybe you can tell me what you're doing alone on this bridge at 4 in the morning, Julia said. "I have a car parked nearby, so let's go there. It's freezing outside, and I'll tell you what I'm doing here." Steve said it so simply that Julia simply believed the man. The woman nodded in agreement and they walked to the man's car. Once inside the car, Steve quietly said that he had an exciting moment of memory with the bridge. The woman looked at the man with interest and asked if she could find out about it. The man looked at Julia thoughtfully and said that he was willing to tell her about himself if he could hear her story of why she wanted to end her life. Julia thought for a while and then agreed, and the man began to speak. "I had a girlfriend I loved, whose name was Maria. We met by chance. I wandered into the exhibition of young artists in the gallery and saw her. I'll tell you right away that I'm not at all familiar with art and my visit was in this place only for the sake of brightening up my leisure time. And then I saw Maria, fell in love at first sight, but I did not know how to meet the girl. She noticed, apparently, my dumbfounded look at her, because the first came up to me and asked why I so look at her, and I as a sheep could not say anything in response. And she laughed. Maria immediately realized that I was not indifferent to her, so she offered to meet me. I was grateful to her for this, because I could not have offered it myself. We had a date, and then a second date. At that time, I was working as an investigator, and I was 26 years old, and she was 24 years old. Anyway, we started dating, but it was innocent dating. We didn't even kiss, let alone do anything else. And then about a month after we met, we ended up here on the bridge. It was on this very day, which is now, and I unexpectedly proposed to her, and she smiling happily agreed, and then I kissed her for the first time. With these words, the man paused and looked out the car window. Julia listened to the story with bated breath. She completely forgot about herself, as she saw that the man as if he was reliving his past all over again. The woman waited for the continuation of the story, but the interlocutor was silent, and then she quietly coughed and reminded herself. Steve involuntarily shuddered and looked at the new acquaintance, and then more quietly continued the story. Soon we were married. A year later, we had twins. There were two adorable girls we named Veronica, Cindy. Maria and I were still planning at the time that we still wanted a daughter, who we would name Katie. Just imagine we would have three girls named Veronica, Cindy, Katie, and again Steve fell silent. Julia waited impatiently for him to continue as she saw him involuntarily brush away a tear with the back of his hand. Julia touched the man's arm and suggested changing the subject. She didn't know why she did it, but Steve smiled and said that he would bring his story to the end. And he continued speaking. Our dream was not destined to come true. Our girls were already 5 years old. Maria went to work when our daughters were 3 and we put them in kindergarten. At that time, I was investigating a too serious case, which involved officials who had not the last place in our city. In general, when we took one criminal, I was offered to make sure that this criminal did not get time. I refused. It was not in my principles to help the bandit to remain unpunished. And then the irreparable happened. I was threatened, but I didn't believe that in this day and age they could do anything to me. And again, Steve paused. He took a long time to gather the strength to speak and soon began to speak again. That afternoon, my spouse said she was going to drive our car to visit her mother and her children. She does this once a month and I didn't suspect anything, and so I agreed and, as was always the case, left the car with her that day. She had power of attorney to drive. And just a couple hours later, as I was at work, I got a call that my car had been blown up. I couldn't believe what I heard and really hoped that my spouse and children weren't there. However, it was when Maria got into the car and started the engine that the explosion occurred. And I lost a loved one in 2 swallows, my daughters, overnight. At that moment, I thought I was going to go crazy. But in me lived the revenge of reprisal. Only this feeling helped me to cope with grief. I made every effort to lock up and not to release this bandit, because of whom I lost my family. But then I had to find the scumbag who blackmailed me, and on his unspoken order, Maria and my daughters were gone. And only after a year and a bit I was able to put away that scoundrel who gave the order that my family was gone, and then the perpetrator of this act was also found. I can't say that I felt any better after that, as I sometimes felt that I should have gone ahead and let that scumbag go and my wife would still be alive with my daughters. I often indulge in these thoughts, but I know that if I had gone against the law, Maria would not have approved of it. But that makes me feel a little better. So I've told you my story. I hope you now understand my visits to this bridge. I'm drawn here by memories of Maria. Here I relive again and again those exciting moments when I was happy with the woman I loved. Honestly, I didn't even expect myself to open up to a complete stranger, but I don't regret it at all. Maybe I needed an outside listener too, but I don't know why. Now it's your turn to confide in me. It's much better when you tell your life to someone outside of yourself, the man said and looked at the woman who was sitting silently. Steve wanted to add something else, but immediately changed his mind. He got out of the car for a few minutes, looked at the sky, and then returned to the car and turned to his new acquaintance. My story has been told, now it's your turn. I can't force you to talk, and now it's your choice again, whether to trust me or not. You know, after what you told me, I'm shocked. You had such a tragedy in your life, and you did not give up. And I almost smell of a. But you know what I'm talking about. But answer me this question. Why do you want to know about me? I don't even know how to answer that. Let's just say that if I hadn't been there on the bridge, you would have realized your intention. And now I feel like I'm responsible for your fate. And to be honest, I really wonder what event in your life made you decide to leave your life of your own free will. My life in 2 words cannot tell in 2 words, replied quietly interlocutor. At that moment, the man laughed softly. Julia looked at Steve with surprise. She did not understand what was so funny. The man, seeing the perplexity of the passenger, immediately apologized and said, I have a day off today and I'm in no hurry. And it seems to me that before that you didn't care about the time in connection with your idea to jump from the bridge, and now you suddenly remembered about the time. Julia initially wanted to take offense at this remark, but she immediately put herself off, because he was actually telling the truth. The woman smiled sadly and said that she was ready to tell her story. The man nodded in response and motioned for her to begin. Julia squeezed her temples with her palms and then lowered her hands, clasped them together, and began her story. Julia was born in the village, and there was only one other child in the family, her younger sister Leslie. When Julia was 17 years old, her father died of a heart attack. The girl's mother Betty was very worried about the death of her husband, as she was happy with her spouse. Julia, already a month after the funeral of her father, realized that without her father's salary now they will have a hard time. She saw that her mother tried to give her and her sister a tidbit. Julia decided that as soon as she finished 11 grades, she will go to the city to enter the seamstress and try to get a job in addition to studying and help her mother financially. And the girl realized her dream. She actually, after graduating from high school, went to college, settled in a dormitory for non-residents, and found a job in the evening washing floors in a grocery store. When Julia received her first paycheck, she immediately transferred most of it to her mother. Betty scolded her daughter for this and asked her not to transfer any more money to her mother, but to spend it on herself. Julia responded by saying to her mom, I know how hard it is for you financially now. It is necessary that Tanya was not worse dressed than others. You know that she is now at such an age when you want to show off the new clothes. Daughter, I understand everything, but you have to work and study, and it's very difficult. And you need money yourself. I can't help you much. Don't worry about me. I still get a scholarship. You better take care of yourself and ask Leslie what she wants for her 15th birthday. As soon as you find out, call me and let me know, replied her daughter. It's been 6 months since Julia went to college, and now she's on her way home for winter break. She is bringing her mother a cosmetic kit as a gift and her sister a fashionable pair of jeans. The girl anticipates how she will please her relatives. However, when she arrives home, she finds out that her mother is in the hospital. Julia scolded her sister for not informing her about it, and Leslie said in response, My mother asked me not to tell you anything. She did not want to worry you, as she was worried that you would drop out of school and rush home. The next day, the sisters visited their mother at the district hospital. Julia affectionately reproached her mother for hiding the hospitalization from her. Betty, seeing her daughter scolding her, smiled back and said that her health was improving from that moment on. Julia kissed her mother tenderly and promised to visit her every other day. The winter vacation flew by quickly, and Julia returned to her studies in the city. As she was walking, a man's voice called her name from behind. She turned around and saw an unfamiliar guy. The girl looked at him in surprise and said, Yes, I'm Julia, but I don't know you. Actually, I don't know you either. I was mistaken. I thought my former classmate was coming. It's funny that you have the same name as her. Let me walk you out since I already know your name. My name is Anthony. Thanks, but I don't need a chaperone. You're such a prick. I just want to see you off. I don't have any dark thoughts. And you cannot give your consent. I'll just go behind you, and you cannot forbid me to do that. Especially it is not forbidden by law, said the young man, smiling. Julia involuntarily smiled at this phrase. At that moment, she did not know that this new acquaintance would become her husband in a few months. The relationship between the young people developed very quickly, and soon the guy made a marriage proposal to Julia, and then a modest wedding took place. Julia's husband was from this city, lived separately from his parents in a one-room apartment. He was 25 years old. He worked as a plumber in the housing and utilities. Anthony was fond of soccer and liked to chase on his motorcycle. After the wedding, the girl moved to live with her husband. She told the chosen one that she dreams of graduating from college as soon as possible and get a job to at least somehow help her mother financially. And the girl also told her husband that she has a cherished dream is to open a small atelier. The man laughed and said, "Your dream is quite expensive. You figure out how many finances are needed. It is necessary to buy professional equipment, rent a room, and a lot of fiddles. That's okay. The main thing is to believe in your dream and want it," said in response to his wife. And a month after this conversation, Julia found out that she was pregnant. This news was a surprise for her. Her plan was to first get an education, open an atelier, and then think about children. The girl was at a loss and did not know whether she should be happy about the pregnancy or, on the contrary, upset. On the same day, Julia informed her husband that she was in an interesting position. In contrast to the wife, Anthony immediately exclaimed and began to sprinkle kisses on his wife. The young man rejoiced at the news and said to his wife, "You are a clever girl. You have made me such a gift. You and I will become parents. It is such a happiness." Julia, as she saw the reaction of her spouse, she realized that there was no doubt that this baby would be born. And only after that she realized that in fact in their family there is a lack of a child. The girl decided that training would wait for a while, as well as the opening of the atelier. Julia notified her mother about this news, as well as her mother-in-law. Relatives warmly congratulated the young woman and asked her to take care of herself. Julia assured that she will definitely monitor the state of her health. The girl quit her job at the insistence of her husband. She did not want to do this, but Anthony was categorical. The husband said that he did not want to risk his wife's health when she carries a heavy bucket of water in the store. In due time, Julia gave birth to a healthy baby girl, which the young parents called the beautiful name Ariana. From the maternity hospital, the woman and her infant were greeted by Anthony and his mother. The man carefully accepted the small package from the hands of the nurse and looked at the tiny face of the baby, softly said, "Our Ariana is like an angel." Time moved slowly forward and soon the girl was 1 year old. Julia thought about going back to college. The young woman really wanted to realize her cherished desire and in the future to open an atelier. In this regard, she started a conversation with her husband. "I want to continue my studies." "Very interesting. But what about our little girl? She is still a baby. Who will babysit her?" "I thought I'd talk to my mom about it. That she's only working, even though she's just retired. Let her rest a little and sit with Ariana for 6 months. The more we will see her more often, and she will live with your mom. And as soon as she's 1.5 years old, she can go to nursery school. You've got it all figured out." I don't even know what to say. In general, we did not even ask their mothers and whether they agreed to this, thoughtfully said the husband. "I'll talk to my mom and your mom myself. The main thing is that you do not mind, and I have one more favor to ask of you. Please stop frolicking on a motorcycle like a boy. Do not forget that you are already the head of the family and racing on the highway like a teenager." "Yeah, I don't do that very often." "Well, I promise that I will be even less likely to skip this iron horse," with a smile said the man and kissed his wife on the lips. Julia soon talked to her mother, who at first refused her daughter's proposal, saying that she would lose her job and therefore the additional income. But Julia convinced Betty that this way she would see more often with her granddaughter and with her children. Leslie at that time was already in college in the same city where Julia lived. This last argument was decisive and the older woman agreed. A month later, Betty arrived and moved in with Anthony's mother. Julia had recovered in college, and after studying, she would go straight to her mother-in-law's house to see her daughter. And when meeting Ariana, told the little girl that she missed her very much and loved her madly. 6 months flew by and the girl turned 1.5 years old. Julia wanted her mother to still hang out with her granddaughter at least until she was 2 years old, but Betty told her daughter, "I cannot live in the city. I feel trapped in 4 walls. I want to go home. I miss the country air. Why don't I take Ariana to my place in the village and you can come on vacation? No, Mom, that's out of the question. It's one thing not to see my daughter for a day, but it's another when I don't see her for months. But I won't talk you into it. I know you're homesick for your garden and the country. But don't leave until I put Ariana in a nursery. I would ask my mother-in-law to take care of my daughter, but she's working, Julia said. Soon the young woman had Ariana in the nursery, and after that, Vicky went home. Julia saw her mother off at the train station and asked her not to work too hard in the vegetable garden and to take care of herself. The old woman replied that her daughter had grown up to be a good person. 6 months flew by unnoticed, and Julia hurried to pick up her daughter after college. The young woman, as always, began to ask Ariana how she had spent the day, and the child was still not quite coherently trying to tell her mother what they were doing in the group. Julia came home with her daughter and found her husband not at home. The young woman furrowed her eyebrows as she realized where her spouse might be missing, namely, running around the track on his motorcycle again. Julia had argued with him several times before, but Anthony only promised that he would stop racing, but in fact continued to ride. The time was nearing 9 o'clock in the evening and Julia was getting nervous. She dialed her husband, but he was out of range. The woman called her mother-in-law and asked if her son had arrived before her. Anthony's mother reported that he had not. Soon the clock struck midnight and Anthony was still gone. Julia could not find a place from anxiety and dialed her spouse several times in succession, but the subscriber was still not online. The young woman only dozed off in the morning when she was immediately awakened by the phone call. She happily grabbed the receiver, thinking to herself that it was her husband, but when she saw the number, she realized it wasn't him. Julia picked up the phone and heard an unfamiliar male voice saying her surname, first name, and middle name in a questioning tone. The woman replies that it's her and perplexedly says, "What do you want?" "You need to come to the morgue for identification," said the caller and then gave the address where to come. Julia was at a loss at first. She could not believe what she had heard and asked the caller again if he had gotten the number wrong. However, the man repeated the information one more time and then disconnected the connection. The young woman sat down on the floor in exhaustion. She wanted to scream with horror, but she couldn't. He didn't even have tears at that moment. Julia called her mother-in-law and said in a lifeless voice that she had just been informed. A short time later, Julia, accompanied by Anthony's mother, was at the morgue. The first to look at the body was an elderly woman who screamed out her son's name. After this, Julia looked and at once the light before her eyes faded. She came to on a couch in the corridor of the morgue. A man in a white coat stood over her and gave her a sniff of a pungent-smelling, absorbent cotton. As Julia woke up, the medic said, "You've lost consciousness. How do you feel now?" And after these words took a glass with liquid from the nightstand, which he handed to the woman saying, "Drink this sedative. You need it now." Julia instantly realized where she was and what grief had happened in her family. She did not sob, but simply covered her face with her hands and froze in that position. She could hear her mother-in-law wailing in the distance about the loss of her son. Julia remained in that position for a few minutes, and then she took her hands off her face and asked the paramedic to give her another look at her husband. The man nodded silently and invited with a gesture. Julia walked over to the body and stroked her lover's cheek. She didn't scream, didn't sob. Tears just streamed down her face continuously. The woman stood like that for a few minutes and then went out into the hallway. Here a man in uniform approached her and told her how Anthony had crashed. Julia listened to the man in silence and asked permission to leave. He said yes, and Julia went to her mother-in-law's house. The women embraced. Then the funeral was held, where many people were present. Many good words were said for Anthony. Julia did not shed a single tear during the burial. She was as if petrified from the inside. It seemed to her that a part of her was buried together with her husband. The young woman, when the coffin was already buried, realized that now she would never again be able to hug the man she loved and say how much she loved him. After Anthony's funeral was a couple of months, all this time Julia often visited the grave, bringing artificial flowers. She would sit near the grave for long periods of time and mentally talk to her deceased husband. she would tell how she spent the day and how their daughter was growing up. Time slowly moved forward, and now Ariana was 2.5 years old. Suddenly, Julia received a call from her mother's neighbor informing her that Betsy had been taken to the hospital. The young woman was terrified that she might lose her mother as well. She immediately called her sister back and only wanted to tell her that her mother had been hospitalized and she was going to leave today, or at least tomorrow, as Leslie said. "I already know about everything. My mother's neighbor told me a few minutes ago. I can't go at the moment as I have studies. I have school too, and what of it?" Julia said, perplexed. "Why don't you go and find out? If it's serious, I'll come right away. I really can't get out of school. We have a very strict with it here. Just a little something and expel." Almost not crying, said Leslie. Okay. Just be always in touch," said her sister, who was surprised by Tanya's behavior. Julia immediately called the college and explained her situation and asked to give her a few days to go to the village. There was no refusal. The young woman then went to the train station to buy a train ticket. Much to her disappointment, she was only able to buy a ticket for the top shelf, as there were no other seats available. So Julia and her daughter entered the train car. She found her seat and sat down, waiting for fellow travelers to try to exchange shelves. Soon came a man who had the top shelf, and then came a middle-aged woman with a child, who looked to be about 5 years old, who had bought 2 lower seats for herself and her son. Julia asked the woman to give up the lower seat, but she was rudely refused. Julia said, perplexed, "I don't understand why you are so adamant. Your boy is 5 years old, and he can sleep on the bottom shelf on his own, and you are mine on the top shelf. Just imagine how I will sleep with my little daughter upstairs. You should have bought tickets in advance, and not to save money, but to take a separate seat for the child, like I did. I have an unplanned trip. My mom was hospitalized, so I had to take a ticket for the next train. I don't care about your problems, and don't talk to me about it anymore," the woman said sharply and began to settle down defiantly. Julia only wanted to tell her companion that she was being dishonest, but then she was approached by a guy from a neighboring compartment who offered her a lower seat. Julia thanked the young man and then saw that he was an invalid. The guy had no arm up to his elbow. The girl resolutely refused the offer, but the neighbor in the compartment pronounced, "You do not look that I am disabled. I can easily get on the second shelf, but you and your child will obviously not be comfortable there, and there's no sense to persuade this lady. So please don't refuse. Don't make me feel inferior. Thank you very much. I did not want to offend you." Just not finishing the phrase, the girl was embarrassed. "No need to thank me. Let's throw your things, and I'll take your place," said the young man with a smile. Julia, in response, thanked the guy once again, and mentally thought, what a noble young man this young man is, and then took her bag and daughter and went to the next compartment, throwing a scornful look at the woman who did not give way. Soon Julia visited her mother in the hospital. The girl looked at her mother with a concerned look and immediately noted that her mother had given up a lot in the last month. Julia asked her mother how she was feeling, and she said that she was fine. The girl realized that her mother would not tell her anything, so she turned to the attending doctor and asked him to tell her about the patient's health. The doctor listened to the visitor's request and said, "What can I tell you? Your mom needs to worry less and reduce physical activity. But she sits at home and does nothing. What other physical activity?" Julia asked, perplexed. "Are you asking me? These children have gone, do not even know how their parents live. Your mother works, she picks potatoes at the base. And there you don't just pick potatoes, you have to carry sacks of potatoes," the man in the white coat said reproachfully. Julia felt ashamed after the doctor's words and returned to her mother's room. She sat down next to Betty and quietly said, "Mammy, why are you doing this? Promise me that as soon as you are discharged, you will immediately quit working. I will never forgive myself if you undermine your health because you help us." "Daughter, who else can help you but me? I know you need money, and your dream needs money too. Yes, and Tanya needs help while she's studying. Mom, if you don't quit your job, then I'll drop out of college, so you decide how to do the right thing," quietly but firmly said her daughter in response. And only when she saw that her mother nodded obediently in agreement, Julia turned the conversation to another topic. The young woman stayed in the village for a few days, and as soon as the doctor said that Betty was getting better, she informed her mother that she was leaving. Julia once again reminded her mother of her promise not to work again. And life went on again, and soon Julia graduated from college and got a job in a garment factory. The young woman tried to save on everything she could. She wanted to help her mother financially. And Betty, as soon as she received a transfer of money from her daughter, she immediately called and scolded Julia. She said, "If you send me money, I'll go out to work. If you have an extra dime, save it for a rainy day. Life is unpredictable. I'm stretching myself, and I don't need much for an old woman, but you, as a young woman, need cosmetics and other things. And don't forget Ariana, she needs a doll and candy too. What rainy day? I don't send you money every month, but occasionally, so don't scold me. And I don't wear much makeup. And just try to go to work. I'll take offense at you," Julia said sternly in response. A few years passed. By this time, Julia's sister had finished her studies and lived with her mother in the village. The girl worked as a pharmacist in a pharmacy. She had a young man who proposed to her, and soon she married him. And then Leslie gave birth to twin girls. Julia, on the other hand, continued to work and was preparing to give her daughter to the first grade. The young woman herself sewed a uniform for Ariana and happily admired her girl. Julia was interested in how her daughter would study and what she wanted to become in the future. She asked her daughter about it often and heard different answers every time. Ariana said that she dreamed of becoming a singer, and a week later the girl dreamed of becoming a famous fashion model, and after another time she wanted to be the director of a toy store. All these answers amused Julia. She realized that her daughter was not ready to give a definite answer because of her age. A year passed and Ariana finished the first grade, and Julia, together with her daughter, went on vacation to the village. The young woman, as always, went to her mother not empty-handed. She tried to always bring at least some gift to her mother. Julia did not forget about her sister with her husband and children. And as soon as Julia appeared at her mother's house, she learned that Leslie divorced her husband. This news shocked Julia, and she began to ask her sister what was wrong with her husband. Leslie did not become cunning and frankly reported that the chosen one found a woman on the side and went to live with her. Julia sympathized with her sister and advised not to get upset about it. Leslie calmly replied, "I'm not even worried. If my husband is a dog, then he and in Africa will be it. Let him go to all four sides. The main thing that the alimony will be good to pay. After all, works as an agronomist. And I'll always find a man for myself. My face is not ugly, my figure is chiseled. So sister, don't worry about me in this respect. You need to take care of yourself, otherwise you're all alone and alone." Yes, I had an admirer. We dated for about a month, but it didn't work out. We were always fighting over little things. We didn't torture each other and just broke up. And now I'm not even in a hurry to get acquainted, as I have plans to open my own business. My mother-in-law offered me help in the form of finance, so I don't have a lot of time for amorous affairs at the moment. Wow, so soon you'll be a lady with a rich dowry? Leslie asked with a laugh. Laugh, 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 but I'm gonna give it a shot. I think it's going to work out, said her sister admonishingly. No offense, I'm just kidding. And where do you want to start your business? The amount of mother-in-law gives a small, so initially I will go to Washington for goods and sell in his city for various organizations. Most likely it will be children's clothes, so I can dress Ariana and your children at the same time. And then, as soon as I increase the capital, I will start to buy equipment, and then already on the rise, that is, rent a room, hire staff, at least one more seamstress. Approximately this is my plan. I hope that in a year or a year and a half already open their atelier, Julia replied and looked at her sister with a wait-and-see attitude, waiting for her reaction. Leslie only shrugged her shoulders in response. After the summer vacation, Julia and her daughter returned home and began to realize her dream. Initially quit her job, and then she took money from her mother-in-law, left Ariana at her place for a few days, and went to Washington herself. Julia bought a batch of baby clothes and came home, and then she began to go to businesses with the bulks. The young woman was very hopeful that she would sell the goods in a short time, but the trade was not going well. Julia was genuinely annoyed about it. It had already been a month after arriving from Washington, and the goods were not even realized. And a third, the woman could not understand why she could not sell children's things. Her mother-in-law came to her rescue and said, "You need to replenish the goods with a new assortment. Perhaps in this case will be sold and from the last arrival of children's things. But I can't help you financially. I already gave you what I had, you know it yourself. I would not have taken money from you. You have already helped me. Thank you so much for your advice." Julia wondered for a long time where she could get more money. She knew there was no point in going to her mother. Leslie lives with her 2 children and her income is her own salary and child support for her daughters. Julia long puzzled over where to take money and came to the conclusion that there is only one way out is to take a microloan for a month. The young woman took the loan the next day and went to Washington to pick up the goods. As soon as she came back, she again went to various organizations and businesses with her bags. But this time too, there was no trade. Julia was desperate. 2 weeks had passed, and she still hadn't sold half of her goods. The woman realized that the loan would soon be due and she had no money to pay it off. Julia did not know what to do, how she could get out of this situation. She even went to her mother's village to sell at least some of her children's things, but there she was disappointed. Julia was at her mother's for a few days, and Betty saw that her daughter was depressed. The pensioner asked Julia, "What's wrong with you? I can see you're not doing well." "Mom, everything is fine. Just a little headache," Julia lied. "Who are you trying to fool, my daughter? A mother's heart can't be tricked. Just tell it like it is, so I don't worry." "Mommy, this trade is not working out for me. I'm about to pay the loan, and I don't have any money. I even missed last month's utility bills because of it. My hands are falling down because I don't know what to do. My head is spinning and I can't even imagine what to do." "Calm down, sweetheart. I have some savings, so-called coffins. I'll give them to you. And you know, it seems to me that your trade is not going because you do not have a salesman spirit, which can favorably offer the goods. I think you should quit selling baby stuff. You'll get into debt and then you won't be able to pay it off." "Mommy, I can't take money from you. I'm ashamed that you'll worry about me now. I need to find my own way out of the situation," said her daughter with tears in her eyes. "But don't cry. You yourself have a growing child. And how do you think, if your girl was in trouble, you would not help her, would you? You're not saying anything? Then I'll answer for you that I'd give my last pants to help my own child. So stop being stubborn and take the money and close this loan. And then go back to work," said Betty and stroked her daughter's head. Julia had no choice but to take money from her mom. When the young woman took the money, she promised her mother that she would pay it back in the nearest future. Betty jokingly threatened her daughter with her index finger and sternly told Julia not to even think of returning the amount. Julia, as soon as she arrived home, she immediately repaid the loan. And then, while she still had a job to get some more money, she went back to the organizations and sold children's things for almost the same price as she had bought them. In this case, her trade went much better. She sold almost everything. However, this fact did not please her at all because Julia did not make any profit. Again, Julia took a job in a garment factory. The young woman kept thinking how she could start her own business. She realized that on the salary of a seamstress, she could not accumulate capital. And then Julia filed an ad in the newspaper that sews things to order. The woman was willing to work 15 hours a day just to open an atelier. The ad was responded to 2 weeks after its submission. Julia was approached by a pensioner and asked to shorten her coat. Julia had to refuse the customer because her machine was not designed for sewing thick materials. As soon as the disappointed pensioner left, the landlady burst into tears in despair because she was again in for a disaster. And when Julia had already given up hope that she could at least earn some money, she was called again and asked if she could make a New Year's costume for a 10-year-old girl. The young woman replied that she would be happy to take the job, and at the end of the conversation she added that she would sew the costume in a couple of days. That day, Julia was as jubilant as a child because she had a part-time job. Now the woman dreamed of only one thing, to sew a New Year's costume perfectly, because her reputation as a dressmaker depended on it. Julia actually sued for a couple of days' product, however. For this, she had to stay at work to sweep the seams on the overlock. At home, the woman did not have a special basting machine. But Julia was not embarrassed by this circumstance. The main thing is that the New Year's costume was some like a factory product. And soon the client with her daughter came for the order. The child tried on the outfit and smiled contentedly. And the guest took the suit and fastidiously turned on the inside to examine the seams and then said with surprise, "You're a virtuoso at what you do. I thought it would be bushy and I was wrong. You did an excellent job. I'll recommend you to my friends. And now take the money for your labors." And with these words, I gave the landlady the money. "Thank you very much for your appreciation of my work. I will be grateful if, let's say, make me an unspoken advertisement. I'll give you a discount next time." A few days later, Juliet again called and asked to make a dressy skirt. The young woman invited the client to her place to take measurements and find out what style is necessary. Literally, in a couple of days, the product was ready, and again the words of gratitude followed. Julia was over the moon with happiness because already the second order was summed by her. And then for about a month, the woman did not receive any calls. Julia was ready to give up again, but then the first customer called and said in a businesslike manner, "I have a proposition for you. I need aprons for my beauty salon on my sketch. Only 8 pieces. I want the masters to be in a beautiful uniform, not like everyone else. Will you do it?" "Sure, let your masters come to me and I'll take their measurements. But let's talk about the time frame right away." "All right, I'll wait. I almost forgot. You told me about the discount. Is it relevant or was it just a figure of speech?" "Why would you say that? I promised you that I will reduce the price, and I do not throw my words to the wind," Julia replied respectfully. A week later, Julia made 6 aprons and was paid for them. During this period of time, she was approached by one more woman with a request to make a business suit. As it turned out, Julia was recommended to her by the first client. Julia realized that now not 1 or 2 people know about her, but several, and all of them are satisfied with her work. This means that she has a regular clientele who will go to her instead of to the atelier. And in fact, Julia got a lot of orders. She had to sleep for 4 or 5 hours to have time to suit products, and at the same time she still worked at the main job. But the woman did not grumble at all to fate, that tired unbearable, because she knew for what she went for it. About half a year passed, as Julia titanically worked, and then her mother came to visit her from the village. Betty, as she saw her daughter, aghast and exclaimed, "When was the last time you looked at yourself in the mirror? Dark circles under your eyes, and you've lost so much weight." This hurt Ariana, who was in the kitchen. The girl ran out to meet her grandmother and shouted with delight, "Grandma, what a good girl you are that you came. You go ahead and scold your mom. You're doing everything right. I told her how many times that she only sees her sewing machine. I can't remember when we used to go out together. She even writes at night, and you can't stop her. Maybe your mom will listen to you. Your granddaughter should have called me and told me everything, and I would have come sooner and given your mom a good kick." Soon, when Ariana went to bed, Betty began to reproach her daughter. Her mother told Julia that she should not work so hard, and she also said that all money could not be earned. The old woman added to all this that Ariana was living with her mother, but in fact she was on her own and nothing good could come out of it. Julia closed her eyes tiredly and answered her mother, "I understand everything, but I need that money. You know very well that I can't earn money any other way. You yourself remember the sad experience of my business in the trade. I still have some leftover merchandise. I need to accumulate the initial capital, and then I'll take a loan and then start organizing my own business. Don't you know that work can kill a horse? You and your sewing will be dead before you know it. You're scary to look at." Ariana's right. You can't see anything around you except your machine. You're not even trying to organize your personal life. You look at Tatiana, your sister. She has found a young man and they are going to apply to the registry office. And you are all alone and alone, Betty said mournfully. "Mammy, if you came to lecture me, you're wasting your time. I won't give up what I've done. I'm glad for my sister, and may she be luckier this time than she was the first time she married. And I don't meet a man at the moment because I have a goal and I will pursue it." As for Ariana, at least she sees that her mom is working for her own good. After a few days, Betty left. She still couldn't convince her daughter to relieve herself at least a little from work. And this fact upset the old woman very much, for she feared that Julia would thus undermine her health. A year passed, as Julia worked hard, saving money to spare, and she decided to make a full estimate for the opening of the business. When the calculations were ready, she was horrified to notice that at this rate, she would have to work for at least 2 more years. The woman thought long and hard about what she should do and decided that she would take a large loan from the bank. Julia soon received the loan and immediately quit her job. She found a small space and rented it, then bought professional equipment for 2 seamstresses. Julia realized that she could only hire 1 person at this stage. So soon, Julia opened the atelier and advertised in the local newspaper. The woman warned her regular customers that she would not work from home, and so Julia, together with another seamstress, started working in the atelier. "Sure, let your masters come to me and I'll take their measurements. But let's talk about the time frame right away." "All right, I'll wait. I almost forgot. You told me about the discount. Is it relevant or was it just a figure of speech?" "Why would you say that? I promised you that I will reduce the price, and I do not throw my words to the wind," Julia replied respectfully. A week later, Julia made 6 aprons and was paid for them. During this period of time, she was approached by one more woman with a request to make a business suit. As it turned out, Julia was recommended to her by the first client. Julia realized that now not 1 or 2 people know about her, but several, and all of them are satisfied with her work. This means that she has a regular clientele who will go to her instead of to the atelier. And in fact, Julia got a lot of orders. She had to sleep for 4 or 5 hours to have time to sew products, and at the same time she still worked at the main job. But the woman did not grumble at all to fate, that tired unbearable, because she knew for what she went for it. About half a year passed, as Julia titanically worked, and then her mother came to visit her from the village. Betty, as she saw her daughter, aghast and exclaimed, "When was the last time you looked at yourself in the mirror? Dark circles under your eyes, and you've lost so much weight." This hurt Ariana, who was in the kitchen. The girl ran out to meet her grandmother and shouted with delight, "Grandma, what a good girl you are that you came. You go ahead and scold your mom. You're doing everything right. I told her how many times that she only sees her sewing machine. I can't remember when we used to go out together. She even writes at night, and you can't stop her. Maybe your mom will listen to you. Your granddaughter should have called me and told me everything, and I would have come sooner and given your mom a good kick." Soon, when Ariana went to bed, Betty began to reproach her daughter. Her mother told Julia that she should not work so hard, and she also said that all money could not be earned. The old woman added to all this that Ariana was living with her mother, but in fact she was on her own and nothing good could come out of it. Julia closed her eyes tiredly and answered her mother, "I understand everything, but I need that money. You know very well that I can't earn money any other way. You yourself remember the sad experience of my business in the trade. I still have some leftover merchandise. I need to accumulate the initial capital, and then I'll take a loan and then start organizing my own business. Don't you know that work can kill a horse? You and your sewing will be dead before you know it. You're scary to look at." Ariana's right. You can't see anything around you except your machine. You're not even trying to organize your personal life. You look at Tatiana, your sister. She has found a young man and they are going to apply to the registry office. And you are all alone and alone, Betty said mournfully. "Mammy, if you came to lecture me, you're wasting your time. I won't give up what I've done. I'm glad for my sister, and may she be luckier this time than she was the first time she married. And I don't meet a man at the moment because I have a goal and I will pursue it." As for Ariana, at least she sees that her mom is working for her own good. After a few days, Betty left. She still couldn't convince her daughter to relieve herself at least a little from work. And this fact upset the old woman very much, for she feared that Julia would thus undermine her health. The year passed, as Julia worked hard, saving money to spare, and she decided to make a full estimate for the opening of the business. When the calculations were ready, she was horrified to notice that at this rate, she would have to work for at least 2 more years. The woman thought long and hard about what she should do and decided that she would take a large loan from the bank. Julia soon received the loan and immediately quit her job. She found a small space and rented it, then bought professional equipment for 2 seamstresses. Julia realized that she could only hire 1 person at this stage. So soon, Julia opened the Atelier and advertised in the local newspaper. The woman warned her regular customers that she would not work from home. And so Julia, together with another seamstress, started working in the Atelier. God forbid. Why would you think that? I was just looking out the window when I saw you with a gentleman. That's why I asked. But if you don't want to, you don't have to answer. It's just an acquaintance, and he decided to walk me home. The rest of the day, Julia thought about Alexander, and involuntarily she imagined him embracing her and kissing her passionately on the lips. These thoughts made her hot because she had not been in bed with a man for a long time. The next day, Julia received a call from Alexander at lunchtime and again proposed to meet. Julia gladly agreed. She chose her outfit carefully before the next date. She wanted to charm this man. Before leaving the apartment, the woman once again looked at her reflection in the mirror with a critical eye and was satisfied. Only then she hurried to meet him. That day, they also took a little walk, and Alexander suggested to come to his rented apartment to visit him. The man hinted that he had a surprise for his companion. Julia was intrigued and agreed, and only should the couple enter the apartment, as Alexander pulled the woman to himself and gently said, "You drive me crazy. I didn't sleep all night and thought about you. Whatever you want to do to me, but I'm going to kiss you now." Julia didn't say anything in response, but only closed her eyes. Immediately, the woman felt Alexander's lips digging into hers. She did not push the man away, as she herself dreamed about it. And soon the couple from the hallway moved to the tacta. Julia gave herself completely to passion. Only after a while the man released his partner from his embrace. The woman lay covered with a plaid and admired Alexander, who at this moment gently guided his finger on her lips. Julia at this moment was ready to stay here with this man forever from the fact that she actually felt good. After a few hours, the woman looked at her watch and said that it was time to go home. The man responded by saying that he wouldn't let her go anywhere today. Julia laughed happily at this statement. She was pleased to hear it and said aloud, "Have you forgotten that I have a daughter who is going to lose her mom? Call me and tell me you're spending the night at a buddy's house. You're not a little kid. Why should I teach you? Besides, your daughter's a grown-up. Is that how you want me to stay? Why ask obvious things?" The man mumbled and kissed the woman passionately again. Julia didn't come home that night. She had called in advance and warned Ariana that she would stay at her friend's house until morning. The daughter was surprised, since her mother never slept out, but she did not ask her mother any unnecessary questions. 3 days passed. As Alexander arrived, they saw each other every day, and soon the man said that it was time for him to return home. This news immediately upset Julia. She did not want to part with this man. She was very good with him in all plans. The man immediately noted. His departure upset the woman, and then he said without any problems, "You and I are good together. Maybe let's get together? Is this marriage proposal you just made? Why not? Will you marry me?" "Of course, yes. I have long been in love with you, as we corresponded with you for a month. Then I was madly drawn to you," happily answered Julia and reached out to kiss the chosen one on the lips. The couple decided that the man would first go on a shift and then come to Julia, and they will apply for a registry office here. The woman first offered to live with her, explaining that she had her own business here. Alexander was only happy about it and explained why. He said that he lived with his mother in a Khrushchevka house, and there would be no place to live. Soon Alexander left. Julia was very longing for the chosen one. The woman realized long ago that she was in love with this man without memory. She dreamed of living with this man as a single entity for the rest of her life. And she was completely sure that her lover also felt the same way about her, because he told her so. Julie wanted to shout her feelings to the whole world. She suddenly felt the need to tell someone that she had a loved one. So she decided to call her sister and share it with her. She dialed Leslie's number, and as soon as she heard her voice, she said, "Hi, I'm going to shock you now, but you'll be the first to know the amazing news that your sister is getting married soon. What do you think of my news?" "No way. And you didn't tell me you had a boyfriend this whole time. How could you do that? Come on, tell us who he is and what he's eating." "We're not going to eat him. I still need him. You can't imagine how happy I am. I fell in love like a girl, only thinking about Sasha," Julia said, and then continued to tell about her lover. Leslie listened attentively to her sister, occasionally interrupting to ask an interesting question about Julia's beau. At the end of the conversation, Leslie asked if she could tell her mother about it so that she might be pleased. Julia thought for a moment and then assented. Half an hour after talking to her sister, Julia got a call from her mom. Betty congratulated her daughter heartily and asked when she would come to the village with her lover to introduce her. Julia at a loss to say that this topic with Alexander did not discuss. And then she assured her mother that as soon as her lover arrived, they would mutually decide everything and inform about the day of arrival in advance. Now Julia thought about how to inform her daughter that her mom was getting married soon. The woman thought about it for a long time and then decided that it was necessary to tell it as it really was. And when Ariana appeared at home, she asked her daughter to sit down for a serious conversation. The girl looked at her mother in amazement and complied with the request. And Julia, sighing, blurted out, "I want to tell you that I am marrying the man you saw with me." "Wow, you sure know how to surprise a mom. And now I'm guessing which friend you slept at the other night. So all I can do is congratulate you. You deserve a happy family life. Grandmother is always talking about it," said Ariana with a smile, who was really happy for her mom. "Daughter, I was so afraid to see your negative reaction. I love you so much." "What are you talking about? Why else should I have a bad attitude to the event when my mom is happy?" asked the girl in surprise. "Oh, well, let's not talk about that. I'd rather tell you about it," the mother said happily. Time flew and soon Alexander arrived. The couple filed an application, and after Julia took the chosen one to introduce his relatives in the village. Betty, when she saw the future son-in-law, she mentally noted that the man is outwardly quite attractive, and when communicating, this man seemed to her a pleasant interlocutor. But literally the next day, the pensioner slightly changed her first impression, and all because of the fact that she was visited by the granddaughter of her neighbor, who at that time was 19 years old. Betty immediately noticed how appraisingly Alexander looked at the girl's body. It was this look that the lady of the house did not like. And when the moment came, her mother turned to Julia and asked her if she was sure of this man. Julia looked at her mother in bewilderment and answered that she had known Alexander for more than 3 months. Betty didn't ask her daughter anything more. After returning from the village, the couple filed an application and the man moved in with Julia. Ariana welcomed her mother's chosen one, which pleased Julia, who was worried about how the relationship between the two loved ones would develop. Soon there was a marriage ceremony. The wedding couple did not begin to play on this, insisted the bride. She did not want a flamboyant show. Alexander did not challenge the desire of his wife. They just celebrated this significant day in a restaurant in the circle of relatives and close friends. Julia was only surprised that Sasha's mother did not come to the birth and asked a question on this topic. "Why isn't your mom here? This road is tiring for her. Don't worry, she will be happy for us at home. Especially I will send her pictures." Time moved on slowly. Ariana graduated from high school and went to Washington, D.C. for medical school. The couple lived alone. Alexander traveled every other month on a shift. At such times, Julia was very worried that with her lover may happen, and she was also wildly jealous of him. The woman even once asked him to quit the job, but he refused the offer, saying, "I don't want to sit on my wife's neck like a burden. I must have my own personal finances. So let's find you a suitable job here. The wages are small here and I am already used to working there. I want to save up for a car. I've been wanting one for a long time. I want to buy a Ford," said the husband. The woman took her husband's dream and even thought that it is possible to present such a gift to her spouse on his birthday. True, at the moment she could not do it, because the money she had on her card she was collecting to pay off the loan in the bank. But this idea of gifting an auto to her husband had become her dream come true. Life continued to go on evenly as suddenly an unfortunate thing happened. Leslie called and informed her that her mom had died of a heart attack. Julia howled like a wounded animal at this message. She shouted and beat the wall with her fist. She was completely knocked out by the news. The woman considered herself guilty that her mother was gone and could not understand the reason why she blamed herself for it. Betty was buried next to her husband. The sisters thought that mom would approve of their choice, because even after the departure of Dad in the next world, she continued to love him. And left already without a husband has not once responded to the advances of other men. A year had passed since Betty's death. During this time, Ariana met a young man with whom she came to her mother's house to introduce her to her future son-in-law. Julia was confused when she heard this. She didn't expect her daughter to get married so early. The woman asked Ariana a question. "Are you sure about your feelings for this guy? It's just that marriage is a very important step in life. You have to weigh everything carefully before you can become legally married." "Mommy, of course I've thought about it, and I've already met his parents. They have warmly accepted me and even called me daughter-in-law, so you should get ready for the wedding." "I was shocked by your message, my daughter. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I remember when you also shocked me with the message that you're marrying Uncle Sasha. So you and I are even," the girl said with a laugh. "Well, let's think about what to give you newlyweds for the wedding," with a smile said the mother of her daughter and gently stroked Ariana on the cheek. "And you don't have to think, I can tell you. Give us a car. In Washington, without it is very difficult. And the parents of the chosen one have already told us that they will give us the keys to a one-room apartment. So we're gonna be a well-off young family." Soon Ariana left with her fiancé, and after her departure to Julia approached her husband and a little sarcastically said that he heard the conversation about the car. The woman looked at her husband perplexed. She could not understand the tone of the spouse and asked what he was not satisfied. Alexander grinned and said that the girl was barely 18 and she immediately everything falls into her hands. And then he added that he had been saving for a car for several years and could not raise the necessary amount. Julia was a little stunned by what she heard and said, "But Ariana is my daughter and she's getting married. If you heard the whole conversation, you should have heard that the young man's parents are giving them an apartment." "You obviously didn't hear me. That's too bad," the man said dryly and walked out of the apartment. Julia was perplexed by this short dialogue and also by the behavior of her spouse that he just left without saying a word. The man was gone for a long time and Julia called him, but her husband did not pick up the phone. The woman began to feel vague anxiety and tears came to her eyes. She didn't know what to think and was about to call the police when the front door opened and Alexander came in. Julia rushed to her husband and began to ask him where he was. The man said dryly that he was breathing fresh air. The woman in despair asked the chosen one to talk to her, but Alexander clearly said that he had no desire and wanted to sleep. The next day, the spouse was also speechless and Julia felt that she was guilty of something in front of him. It bothered her and she turned to her husband. "Why are you doing this to me? Is it because of this car that I want to buy and give to my daughter? So this gift will be from both of us. Do what you want. I don't care." "Wait, don't walk away from the conversation. You want a Ford, and I remember that. Let you be patient for a while, and after a while we'll buy you a new car. But now we have to make a gift for Ariana," exclaimed the woman and looked worriedly at her husband, and he just silently went to the kitchen and began to make coffee. At the same moment, Julia ran in and holding back tears tried to hug her husband. Alexander pulled away and said that he was going on watch tomorrow. The woman looked frightened at her lover and quietly said that it was too early for him to go to work. She was afraid that Alexander would leave her. In response, the man said nothing. Julia touched her lover's hand and said, "Okay, I understand you. You want me to help you with the purchase of a car. Let it be so. You may be right that it is too early to give such fancy gifts to the newlyweds as it is not known whether they will still live together or not. Look for a Ford that we can buy, and I'll talk to my daughter about getting a car for them a little later." And after these words, the woman looked at her spouse, who as if nothing had happened was cooking coffee in a turbine. Alexander simply ignored his wife. Julia could not stand it and screamed hysterically, "Do you not hear me at all? I offered you to buy a car, and you don't even look at me." Alexander turned and pulled the already crying spouse to himself, hugged her gently and quietly said to calm her down, and then lifted the woman in his arms and carried her to the sofa, where he began to tenderly shower her with kisses. After that, the couple had intimacy, and Julia, lying on the shoulder of her lover, thought that she agreed to do everything to make it good for her and Sasha. The next day, the woman transferred an sum to the card of the spouse, and he began to look for a car. and soon in the yard there was already a red Ford which belonged to Alexander. The man was unspeakably happy about this purchase, which did not hide from Julia. But the woman felt awkward in relation to her daughter because she realized that if Ariana in the near future will apply to the registry office with her boyfriend, she will not have time to save enough money to buy a car. A few months passed after the purchase of the car, and the woman began to notice that her spouse somehow cooled to her. This made Julia think. She tried to find out from her husband why he became indifferent to her as a woman. Alexander made a perplexed face and asked, "Are you even? What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about. It seems to me that you ignore me as a woman. I do not understand you ladies at all. You make up yourselves. What the hell? And honest men all this hang. Have you ever thought that when I come back from my shift, I also drive a cab to earn an extra dime? You and your atelier, you don't see anything around you." "What are you talking about? I'm there 3 or 4 times a week. Maybe you can explain your behavior," Julia said nervously. The man looked at his wife with a sizzling look, but did not answer anything. The woman shivered involuntarily from the gaze of her lover. She had never seen Alexander look at her like that. And the head of the family then packed up and left the house. Julia thought that this was the last unpleasant incident for today, as at the same moment she heard the doorbell ringing. She jumped up excitedly and ran to open it, thinking that her spouse had returned but had forgotten to take the keys to the front doors. However, when she opened the door, she saw a happy daughter with a bouquet of flowers. The girl happily hugged her mother, and then noticing that her mother's face was not happy, asked her, "What has happened here? And why did Uncle Alexander sit in the driver's seat of the red Ford?" "Nothing happened. It's Alexander's car. I gave him money. And you why without warning, in case I was not at home?" Barely audible mother said, "What do you mean you gave him money? But you promised to give us a car for the wedding and my fiancé had heard about it. And we have already informed my fiancé's parents," Ariana said confusedly and then added hastily, "I came without warning because I came to tell them that we have applied to the registry office and we are getting married in a month." "Mom, how could you do that? You just gave us hope and then you didn't fulfill your promise. How am I going to face the groom's parents and my favorite person? Now I'm going to be seen as a blabbermouth after all this." "We'll figure it out," my mother said quietly. "You talk about it so calmly. It takes a lot of money to buy a car. I didn't expect you to do that. I don't mind that you manage your money yourself, since you earned it with your own labor, but why make empty promises to me in public? You can thank yourself now, but there will be no wedding. I'm embarrassed to look the chosen one in the eye after all this. I don't want him to think I'm just like you," Ariana exclaimed passionately. "Stop being hysterical. I'll explain everything to your young man and his parents myself. You will get the car, but a little later." "Yes, how can you not realize that it's not about the car, it's about what you promised, and your words turned out to be nothing. As they say, what you said, it turned out to be air, or rather shaking the air." With these words, the girl handed the flowers and without waiting for a response, jumped out of the apartment. Julia tried to catch up with her daughter and followed Ariana out of the entrance and immediately found out that she was barefoot. The woman gave her daughter a longing look and then returned home. Julia sat down on the sofa and only at that moment she burst into tears. At midnight, her husband returned and went to bed without speaking. Julia realized that there was no point in explaining today and left the conversation until morning. All that night, the woman spent practically without sleep. She waited for the morning, and as soon as it began to dawn, Julia sat down opposite her husband, waiting for him to wake up. After a while, Alexander stretched and opened his eyes. His wife immediately wished good morning and only wanted to start a conversation, as the man, without giving her a chance to say, said, "Yes, I was wrong yesterday. Let's not start this conversation again. Why are we going to spoil each other's mood in the morning? I've admitted my mistake, and I don't want to fight before I leave for work." "How are you going back on watch? But you still have 3 days before you leave," said his wife worriedly. "I only found out yesterday. Called a little earlier, but here, really, I'm not to blame. And now let's make breakfast, and I'll go to the car to get my suitcase, so if you can pack me for the shift. You like to do it," said the man and gently stroked his wife's hand. Julia felt a little encouragement from the man's words because he recognized that yesterday he was wrong. The woman got up from the couch and smiled gently at her husband. Then she went to the kitchen to make an omelette and brew coffee in a turbo, which was so fond of her Alexander. Julia leisurely prepared breakfast in the kitchen, while mentally scolding her husband's bosses that so unapologetically interrupt the legal weekend and called to work earlier than scheduled. Soon the woman set the table, where she put a plate of omelette and freshly brewed coffee, and at the same moment she heard the front door slam. She immediately guessed that her husband, who had gone to fetch his suitcase, had come in. The woman affectionately called her favorite person to go to breakfast. Alexander came up and said with a smile that he had already caught the smell of coffee in the hallway. Julia smiled in response and wished a pleasant appetite, and herself went to the living room to start packing her spouse for the watch. And only she wanted to go out as she heard Sasha's phrase, "Honey, I need money to buy spare parts." "Wait, but last month you already bought a car and not a small amount of money. Don't be a little girl. A car is a woman and it needs care and attention. And don't forget, I used the car to get to the shift, and it's not always a good road, so the parts just fly," said the head of the family nonchalantly. "Maybe then you better go to work, as before, not on your own transport. This way we will save on gasoline and spare parts. Why do you think I need a car if I don't have to drive it?" the man said unhappily. Julia immediately realized that her husband was not satisfied with her answer, so she hurried to say that the money will naturally give. And then the woman added that she would go slowly to pack her things, so as not to do it at the last minute. Alexander smiled contentedly and nodded in agreement. Julia walked to the living room and began pulling her spouse's clean underwear out of the dresser. She stacked her husband's clothes on the couch. Then she took the suitcase and placed it next to the linens and opened its lid. She noticed a corner of a piece of paper sticking out of a side pocket. Julia tugged at it, and another one appeared behind it. The woman pulled out 2 pieces of paper and was surprised to find that they were 2 vouchers, one in her husband's name and the other for a woman she didn't know. Julia looked at the 2 documents for a long time and could not understand why these 2 papers were in her husband's suitcase. And then it dawned on her lightning fast. That's why he was allegedly called a little earlier to work, and why her husband called to her. The woman realized that the lover has a mistress on the side. Julia, holding the vouchers in her hands, went to the kitchen, where the unsuspecting Alexander was having breakfast. The woman stretched out the papers to her spouse and, barely restrained from indignation, said, "You said a word called, so you need spare parts? Why did you forget to tell me that you were going on a trip with a lady you rest?" The man looked at the documents and then at his wife and calmly said, "So you found it? Well, it's even better. What did you think? I will wait for you to get cellulite, to walk in a tattered darn robe, when there are young beautiful beauties who do not sobriety as you. Yeah, plus they're willing to give you money without reminding you. You're the one who has to beg. I don't like it, and I'm glad you found these vouchers. I don't have to explain everything to you. I hope you're not a completely stupid woman and realize that I have long ago set you horns. Realize that not only goats are horny, but goats too. Yes, how could you? I love you with all my heart, and you just spit in my soul. I had a fight with my daughter because of you. Did you love me at all? Or did you only care about my bank account? What love? It's a fairy tale made up for the stupid, of which you are one. By the way, who I'm going with is also from the same subspecies, but younger than you, and her father is some official. And these vouchers are at her expense. And please do not reproach me now in anything. You yourself wanted to marry me, and I gave my consent. But the fact is that although you have a business, but still not really stand on your feet, because you have a loan hanging around your neck, and you have previously silent about it, and only boasted that the owner of the studio," sarcastically said Alexander. "What a scoundrel you are. Get out of here now." "Sure, I'll just finish my breakfast, and you pack your things, please," the man said with a smirk. The woman grabbed the plate with the rest of the omelette and threw it on the floor with all of her might. Alexander grinned and got up from the table. Then he went to the living room, where he hastily threw his things into a suitcase, then dressed and left the apartment without a word. Julia, after her husband had gone, squatted down and wept desperately. She cried for a long time and then forced herself to pull herself together and call her daughter. However, Ariana's cell phone was out of range. The woman made several attempts throughout the day, but to no avail. At this, Julia paused and looked at her interlocutor, who was sitting in the car and going through a rosary. The woman wiped away the tears that had come during the narration of her own life story. And at the same moment, Steve turned his head to his companion and quietly asked, "Can I ask you a few questions?" "Sure." "Why didn't you jump off the bridge when your first husband died?" "I had my mom's support at the time." "Yes, and I perceived the tragedy very differently at that time, because my daughter was small and close to me. I could not leave her just like that without me," quietly answered the interlocutor. "And now, what motivated you to go to this bridge?" "You see, I cannot understand it. A man deceived you. It happens quite often, as they say, not uncommon. And you decided that now there's no point in living. Where's the logic in that?" "It's hard to explain, but I'll try. The thing is that I lived for a long time after the death of the first spouse alone. I had a relationship with two men, which quickly ended before it began. And then there was Alexander, so all of himself well-groomed with seductive speeches and able to please a woman, and I was this man simply enslaved, if I may say so. And here he not only betrayed me, but just used me. But this is not the main reason. I let my daughter down. I hurt her. She left and disappeared without a trace. I called the dormitory, but they said they don't house students during the summer. Ariana's cell phone is always out of range, and I don't know my daughter's fianca's address. I realized that my girl just cut me out of her life. There was no way to find her, and I had no one else to confide in. I just felt empty and unnecessary in this life. I just didn't want to live overnight. And something in my soul noted that all this can be stopped at once, and so I decided to take this step. But your words, as if brought me back to reality, that I will only make myself better, but not others." Julia was silent with her head down low. She was no longer embarrassed that tears were streaming down her cheeks. Julia felt relieved that at least someone knew what she was feeling at the moment. Steve was sitting thoughtfully. He saw a woman who was confused and had chosen the wrong solution to her situation. The man was silent for a few minutes, and then he spoke. "What are you going to do next?" "I don't know. I just want to find my daughter and apologize to her." "That's not a problem. I'll help you find Ariana. I would like to hear something else about Alexander. What will you do with him?" The woman thought and was silent for a while, and then she looked at her interlocutor and said that she would like to teach him a lesson, but she didn't have such an opportunity. And Julia added that she felt sorry for the girl with whom Alexander was having fun at the sea and messing with her mind. Steve listened to the woman's answer and then said with a smile, "You can take revenge on this man, but first admit to yourself that you have become indifferent to him in reality. You know, I honestly don't care about him anymore. It's like a veil has fallen from my eyes, and I wonder how I could find something in this man. I can even more frankly say that most likely I was led by passion and the fact that approaching crisis age. All the same, 40 years old is not for every woman directly happiness. But will you help me find Ariana?" Julia said, "I did not throw words to the wind is what you said to your first client. And now tell me how soon Alexander returns from the resort and whether you remembered the name of the woman for whom there was a second ticket." Julia thought about it and said what date her husband was coming back, but she couldn't remember the name of the woman for whom the voucher had been issued. Steve scratched the bridge of his nose and said that now the most important thing was to invite Alexander and his companion to Julia's house, and there would be a surprise waiting for them. The man also added that it was necessary to convince her husband to come with a new companion with whom he went to the resort. Julia looked at the interlocutor in surprise and asked how to do it. Steve thought for a moment and answered, "Say that you have a gift for him in the form of a cash equivalent, and you are ready to give the finances only if you see who he traded you for. And immediately say that there will be no scandal. You just woke up female curiosity. That's gonna be hard to do. I'm not very good at lying. Oh wait, I remembered who the second voucher was written out to." Sleta Skorabovetova and Alexander also said that her father was an official. Julia said happily, "Great. Now we can get down to business. Here is my phone number, and you give me yours. We have only a week left before Alexander arrives, and I'll have to work hard. But you don't do anything stupid, only if you call your daughter from time to time. And if there's any news, call me too. I'll take you home now, and you promise me you'll go to bed with a good night's sleep. Tell me, why are you helping me, and how do you intend to punish Alexander? Juliet asked the questions quietly. I have already told you that after I was able to stop you on the bridge, I am now responsible for you. And as for the punishment, let it be a pleasant surprise for you. Let's say compensation for moral damage. Now let's go. Give me your coordinates. Steve drove the new acquaintance to the given address and asked to be always in touch. Julia vowed and hurried to her home. She just wanted to take a pill for a headache and go to sleep. She felt very tired, and only as soon as the woman drank the medicine and lay down on the sofa, as at the same moment fell asleep. It had been 2 days since the encounter. Julia really wanted to dial Steve to find out about the search for Ariana, but she remembered that the man had said as soon as he had information he would call her back. Julia waited and prayed to God that Steve would find her daughter. And on the third day, the man called and said that he had talked to Ariana and immediately warned that the girl was still angry and not ready to meet with her mother. Steve explained that he had found Julia's daughter thanks to his connections. The woman listened to the interlocutor and discouragedly asked, "When will I be able to see her?" "Very soon. In a few days Alexander arrives, then you can meet. And your daughter also asked me to tell you that soon you will become a grandmother. Ariana loves you very much and wants to see you. It's just that she's still carrying that childish grudge at the moment." "How pregnant? She's just a child, isn't she?" "It can't be," exclaimed the woman. She couldn't believe that her girl was pregnant. "You promised me not to lose your temper, especially now that you're about to become a grandmother. By the way, I congratulate you on this too," the interlocutor said cheerfully and disconnected the connection without waiting for an answer. And the long-awaited day came when Alexander returned from vacation. Julia called him and asked for a meeting. The man initially spoke rudely, but when he heard the purpose of the visit and the amount of remuneration, he was pleased, but agreed on one condition: that part of the money would be transferred as a deposit. Julia was squeamish, but transferred a small part of the money. A couple of hours before Alexander's arrival, Steve came to Julia's apartment, accompanied by a pretty blonde woman and an unfamiliar gentleman. The landlady looked at the guests with bewilderment as she suddenly saw her daughter behind them. The girl rushed to her mother and began to beg her for forgiveness. Julia hugged Ariana and herself apologized to her. All this scene was observed by the guests. The meeting of mother and daughter was interrupted by Steve, who said, "Let's go to the apartment so that Alexander did not see us hear such a cluster in case he comes before the appointed hour." And already Julia and her daughter were standing near the window talking. The others were talking among themselves when suddenly the bell rang. Steve turned to the man whose name was Mickey. "Do you remember when you will need to leave the other room?" Steve then turned to Ariana. "You might as well hide for now, and I'll hide with you. Our exit will be later." Julia watched this process with interest, and then she was already approached by Steve, who asked her to open the door and trust the blonde girl he had brought. The landlady opened the door and saw her husband with a long-legged brunette on the threshold. Alexander smiled radiantly and entered the apartment and without preamble said, "I have fulfilled my part of the agreement, now come on you." And only he said it, as the blonde came out into the hallway and smiling cordially said, "My goodness, who do I see? Alexander, hello. You disappeared so unexpectedly, but I understand that you are no longer interested in me as a money bag, as I had problems in business, but you were in a hurry. Now I'm doing fine. I even opened another hotel, as you evaporated or rather swept over to this woman," and the blonde pointed at the landlady, not letting Alexander speak. The woman continued, "But you still had a good meal at my place, or rather at my expense. I bought you a one-room apartment. And now I see you already blondes and shades are not interested in brunettes and even younger. Your demands are changing every day." At this moment, Alexander rudely interrupted the woman and said sternly, "What kind of service is going on here? I don't know you, citizen, and it's the first time I see you. What one-room apartment? Stop talking nonsense." And then Julia entered the conversation, who realized what play started. "Steve," she said, "maybe you don't know me either. I also had to thank you for the comforts and gave you the money to buy a Ford, which you dreamed of for so many years. By the way, your companion must have thanked you too. For all I know, she paid for the resort." And you told me that you got a moneybags whose daddy is an official. Now I understand who was talking about your companion. And then Steve, Ariana, and Mickey came out. When the brunette saw the older man, she exclaimed, "Daddy, what are you doing here? I don't understand anything." Mickey looked sternly at his daughter and said that he would talk to her at home, and then turned to Alexander. "To avoid punishment, I suggest that you make amends to all the ladies, otherwise I will have to involve influential people so that you do not live sweetly on this earth. I hope I explained it clearly." Alexander stood silent. He had nothing to say. He was just being pushed against the wall at the moment and smeared against it. The man wanted to say something, as at the same second the brunette turned to him and slapped him. At this action, the girls all laughed, and Julia spoke up. "You can give another slap, but already for me, I do not want to dirty my hands just." Alexander was the first to leave, followed by Mickey and his daughter, and then the blonde. There were only 3 people left in the apartment. Ariana saw that Steve couldn't wait to talk to her mom alone, so she told her mother that she wanted to go visit her friend and tell her about the Alphonse's woes. Julia jokingly threatened her daughter with her fist, and she responded by showing her tongue and running out of the apartment. As soon as Ariana left, Steve looked thoughtfully at the landlady. The woman involuntarily embarrassed and said, "Are you trying to accuse me of something again now?" "Not at all. I want to know if you feel better now." The man answered the question with a question. "Yes. And I keep thinking, maybe we were brought together by fate on that bridge, because you are like a wounded bird, and I am a shot wolf," Steve said quietly. After that, the man approached the woman and said that Julia had a phone number and he would be glad to hear from her at any time of the day. And then he smiled and added that about today's lynching will be known to the population very soon, as in his opinion, Ariana will try to be a part of it. And in fact, many people in the city soon learned about this case. They eyed at how cleverly Julia had taught the cheater a lesson, but it was not entirely her merit, and Steve was the one who came up with the idea of how to punish a dishonest man. People then for a long time judged about it, laughing at the grief of a cheater, and Alexander had to soon urgently retreat from the city, but he gave the Ford to Julia, and the daughter of the official had to pay the money for travel from the finances that he saved from his earnings for the car. Except that the blonde refused the compensation, as she was just playing a role to bring Alexander out.